Welcome to the second episode of the Bithell Games Podcast. I'm Alexander Slowinski.
I'm Mike Bithell.
And each week we talk about games, what it's like to make games, the random stuff we don't generally find time to talk about because we are playing and or making games. We'll also try to have guests regularly on the show, or regular guests on the show, although that's a statement about our guests, which I'm not comfortable making.
I think that's a bold statement to make. I think we shouldn't commit to that at this stage.
So, and these guests will give us an inside look at a particular aspect of the video game industry. With that said, I would like to introduce our guest, Adriel Wallick.
Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. It is nighttime here. I've just sort of gotten out of bed and am going to start working soon.
What country are you in now?
Right now? Yeah.
I'm in the Netherlands, so not too far away from you.
Oh, cool.
I'm only here for like another week and a half, though, and then it's the start of 2016 convention travel extravaganza.
We talked about that last week.
We did but I imagine you attend more events than I don't have the nerve to do as many as you do. It scares me.
Well, it also helps that I have to leave this country for 3 months every now and again because I don't actually have a residence visa here and I don't have a home in the US, so
it bounces you around.
Visas.
I know, right? It's very fun.
Cool. So yeah, we wanted to get you on because we've been. So what we try and do is one of the things we do on this podcast is we talk about kind of what we're up to as a studio and what our processes are and what we're thinking about basically at this moment. And right now we're doing a lot of prototyping and a lot of kind of making something, seeing if it works really quickly, moving on to the next thing, or exploring things more. And when we were thinking about like guests that we could have on that would kind of be able to talk about that stuff, you immediately came up in my head because you have made more games in the last year than I think most people do in their career. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it was actually a little over a year ago when I did it, but I made a new game every single week for an entire year once. No big deal or anything. And it was sort of a way to get through a creative process and get better at making, quick design decisions on games and figure out what works and what doesn't work and just prototyping a bunch of different ideas.
Do you have a blog on that type or anything that...
Yeah, if you go to my blog, which is just missminotaur.com, msminotaur.com, I have everything, because every single week what I ended up doing was, I'd finish the game, I'd publish it to my blog and I'd tweet about it and, maybe 5 to 10 people would play it or something. But then I'd write about it and I'd go through where the idea came from, what went right, what went wrong, what I learned from it, the normal post-mortem just on a weekly basis. So I have all of those up there and it's interesting. I actually read back through them maybe a few weeks ago, just a bunch of them. And it was really interesting seeing how I learned basically the same lesson week after week after week about how I'm really bad at managing my time.
So was that just being overambitious or...
For the managing my time thing?
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, I got a lot better at the overambition after, the first maybe 5 to 10 weeks. Because that's one of the things that you learn right away is every idea you have is about 100 times bigger than you think it is. So it's like my go-to piece of advice when I talk to game jammers or people who are going to be doing some sort of quick prototyping is, look at your idea. Make sure you get the most basic version of that idea that you can possibly do.
Now scale it down.
Cut that in half. Cut that in half, maybe again. Peel off a few of the other extra things, and you might have something that you're going to finish by the time that you're done prototyping. And that's a really, really quick lesson to learn. But then once you learn that lesson, then you have to deal with the procrastination part of it, where you're like, oh, well, now that I have such a small idea, I can just start this tomorrow. I don't have to do it right now. And you're like, no, that's not the point of scaling down your idea. But yeah, so I have postmortems from every single week from when I did it up there, and they're interesting to read through. But yeah, I got really good at rapid prototyping by the end of that.
Well, you have to. I mean, that's so like my question's immediately. Well, I'm going to skip the where do you get your ideas because that's the most boring question you can ask anyone.
And you can never answer it because where do ideas come from?
They're just there, right? They're bouncing around in the back of the skull, and most of mine are ripped off of things. I find I like inadvertently steal something.
That's where Thomas Was Alone came from. Is you just saw a box one day and you were like, "What if that box was lonely?"
You joke, but that one was literally I watched Oh Brother Where Art Thou and wanted to make a video game based on it, and that just morphed and warped. But what I'm interested in with you as well is like what do you what, like, did those games ever hit points where you wanted, because you set a very specific kind of structure to your life for a year, and that terrifies me, right? Like, what happened? There must have been times where you were making something and you were like, I kind of want to spend another week on this, right? Or I hate this, I want to move on to something else. Did you let yourself wobble with stuff when it was relevant to do so?
So, not really. What I did was I was very, very strict about, like, you know, any idea I have to either spend the whole week on and not spend any more on it, or just give up, and that was my idea for the week. And I made a very specific point of not going back to an idea I liked in the next upcoming weeks. Even to the point where it was like, if I saw myself making a bunch of top-down, you know, shooter games, I would very specifically tell myself, okay, now this week I have to make a 3D, you know, first-person something or other. With the intention of, you know, afterwards, when I was done with the full year, I can go back and spend time on ideas that I've really liked after that point.
And did you find yourself doing that? Did you go back to those ideas?
There's been a few ideas that I've played around with a bit since then. I haven't really had the time to develop them super further than what they are right now, because life gets in the way and contract work and all that kind of fun stuff. But there are there's probably like out of the 46 games that came out of those 52 weeks, there's probably like 5 games that I really, really liked, and like 1 or 2 that I actually think I could do something real with. And every now and again, when I have like spare time and I'm feeling motivated, I'll go back and I'll pull them up, go through the rigmarole of upgrading whatever Unity version they have come from since then. And then spend like an hour or 2 just sort of playing around with things and seeing what I can do with them. But then they're all, like, the ones that I really liked are still good ideas. But as always, I need time to actually do them. But I have gone back to them a few times.
It sounds like for you, and I don't know if this is true, but it sounds like it's the process that's the thing, right? It doesn't sound like you're not like in a mad dash to like, I must make and finish a video game that is like, you know, I can release on Steam or whatever. It seems like for you, it's much more about the you improving, like the you learning stuff, the you broadening your horizons side of it. Is that true?
Yeah, that was a big part of the Game a Week thing, because when I started doing Game a Week was not too long after I quit my job and went like full-time solo indie developer. And even though I had been making games for a few years at that point, I'd never made games by myself. I'd always just been a programmer, you know, on games, and then sort of like having little design inputs here and there, but nothing really real. So it was one of those really jarring things where once I went solo developer, I was like, wait, I actually don't really know how to design games all that well, or, you know, scope a project down or do any of that stuff. And so a lot of it was improving the process and learning different ways to figure out what design things work and what design things don't work, and how I work and how I can manage myself and my time. So that was a huge part of it. Like, there's no real perk going into doing the Game a Week challenge where I was like, from this, I will have my game that makes me millions. It was more, I need to learn how to make games.
Mike does bring up a good idea here, though, because what you could do is you could take those 46 prototypes that you have and call it the Wallick bundle and put it on Greenlight.
Stop it.
And then let the people decide which one they like the most, and that's the one you would go ahead and turn into a full game. Can I just say,
this is in no way what I said. I want to distance myself.
What a good business idea, Mike. This is a really good Mike Bithell approved idea that you, Mike Bithell, have come up with.
Never let a businessman into your company, Adriel. That's my advice to you.
Never ever. I should just never have business.
Just never have business. It just ruins. No, it's cool. It's cool. I just
Wallick bundle available on Greenlight.
Stop it.
Well,
published by Bithell Games.
You say this, but I did actually package together. I think there was like 7 or 8 like local multiplayer games that came out of that, and I packaged all those together and put it up on itch.io.
That's cool.
As just like a playable thing, and they're all still in their prototype form and everything. But it was
See,
actually...
Mike, you mock me, but she knows where the truth is.
Like a mixtape would be cool. Like I'd pay a bit of money for that. Just have obviously I'm sure these are all available on your website and everything, but just having like
one bundle version.
A one bundle version, like I'd pick that up.
Well, if you're interested in the local multiplayer pack, it is available on itch.io for some amount of money that I forget.
What's the name of it?
local multiplayer bundle.
So people...
You didn't even call it like the Wallick Emporium local multiplayer bundle?
This is what happens when you don't have a business person in your team, Mike.
This is it. I'm starting to see his value. Very, very slowly. But like...
I don't know, you still ended up with Bithell Games, so it's not like you're much better at naming things.
No, I'm terrible at naming things. I'm terrible. Fortunately for me, like, my name is incredibly Googleable, which is just this weird Darwinian, like, thing that I have, which is lovely.
I am fairly certain I am the only Adriel Wallick in the entire world.
Is that true?
I think so, because Wallick isn't a very common last name, and Adriel is a very uncommon first name.
So what so actually, you know what? Now you've set me down the path here. Like, I wonder if that's a thing. Because when you think about indie game developers, generally have relatively rare names, like the ones who you've heard of, have like strange names.
Right. Yeah, Mike is a super strange name.
No, Mike's fine. Like 50% of game developers are called Mike.
Well, I would like to bring up the sort of other thing that Adriel is kind of famous for, which is the train jam.
Yay.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that is the thing that you certainly pop up on my radar like every single year because of that. So I would love to hear more and have you tell a little bit of a story about that.
So I guess I'll give a little blurb of what Train Jam is in case anybody listening doesn't know what it is. But it's basically a game jam that happens on a train that starts in Chicago and ends in San Francisco 52 hours later. And I always run it right before GDC. So we get into San Francisco, 2 days before GDC starts, which GDC is, the largest professional game developers conference in the entire world. So there's a lot of people who go there. And I get, a lot of developers on the train. We make games for the 52 hours. And by the end of it, everybody's made a game. And then starting last year, I actually have been able to get space at GDC where I'm able to show off the games afterwards. Which I think is super cool.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, last year was the first year we were able to do that, and we're getting it again this year. But I just have like 7 or 8 computers set up with all the games on it, and I let people come and play whatever game they click on first. And it's nice because then everybody who's on Train Jam gets a chance to be like, hey, I'm showing a game off at GDC. Look at this, and you get to show GDC participants or GDC attendees more insight into what little prototype games and little jam games look like and where game ideas start from, which I think is a really cool concept. Not that, game developers at the conference don't know where games start from, but if you get people who are new or students or aspiring game developers who attend GDC, then they get to see sort of where the little nuggets always start from.
So how did you handle the Wi-Fi situation? That's sort of my first big question, because, I've participated in game jams, and it's just, we need the internet. So how do you handle the internet on a train between Chicago and San Fran?
So the train itself offers no internet capabilities. There's a bunch of Amtrak lines that do, but this one just doesn't. And so we're sponsored every year by a company based in the US called Karma, and they offer little personal Wi-Fi hotspot devices. Cool. Which is cool. The problem with those is they only connect to 4G and now 3G networks, which I don't know if you've ever traveled through the Midwestern United States, but there's just no signal out there whatsoever, not on cell phones, not on anything. So the majority of the train ride is still, despite us having, more connectivity than zero, is still not very great. So what I end up doing is warning everybody ahead of time that there's no Wi-Fi is basically the best I can do. Warn them there's no Wi-Fi, warn them again that there's no Wi-Fi because nobody listens to the first warning you ever give them. Warn them a third and a fourth time, and then make sure that everybody knows that I seriously mean it. There is no real good Wi-Fi access. Please, dear God, download all of the things you think you might need before you get onto this train. So I try to prepare people as much as possible to download the tools and any documentation they'll need. I usually end up getting USB sticks that are sponsored by a company based out of, I think, Chicago called Playview, and they make USB sticks, or they order USB sticks for me, and we work together and get just sort of like a bunch of documentation, offline documentation that we then load up on the USB sticks. And I give everybody a USB stick, which also works as a good sort of offline source control kind of thing. But yeah, basically people do the jam without Wi-Fi is how I deal with the Wi-Fi situation.
I cannot imagine.
Mike and I are just shaking our heads. Both of us.
I just like, for me, like coding, like I can't imagine coding without.
I know,
like,
right?
Google open. Like I mean, to be fair, like I guess if you've got the documentation off, it's funny as well. You say how was it? You described the USB drives as offline source control.
Yeah.
So Thomas was alone. Like for the first year of its development actually for the entire duration of its core PC development. My source control was a USB pen drive in my sock drawer. Because I figured that was probably the safest place to hide it.
That's awesome.
And it's so terrifying, like one fire.
Yeah, but it's funny though, because people react to the lack of Wi-Fi in very interesting ways. Because what'll happen is, you know how it is when you're working on something and you're like, you know, putzing around on the internet, and then you have like this little burst of work, and then you putz around on the internet and you have this little burst of work. And what ends up happening on Train Jam is people will sort of putz around working, and then have little tiny bursts of internet whenever we pull into a station somewhere and there's some sort of connectivity, and all of a sudden all productivity stops. Everybody checks Facebook. Everybody panic downloads all the assets that they've needed for the last 5 or 6 hours. And then they go back to just sort of working. And it's interesting because people end up getting, at least from what I've seen, a lot more done in those 52 hours than a normal 52-hour jam, because there's not, you know, on the internet. And then I've also seen people just completely change their game or the design of their game based on the fact that their programmer can't figure something out without the internet. And so they'll just be like, okay, well, I can't do this. Let's just design around it and do something completely otherwise that I know how to program. You know, so cool. It's really interesting to see the different little things that happen because of no Wi-Fi.
I genuinely don't know how people did it back in the day. I just don't, they must have done, because someone coded that first browser. No. So, but no, it's cool. The I find the Train Jam fascinating because I couldn't do it because I would hate, I always need to have somewhere I can go. The idea of being in a metal tube with a bunch of people, I would be hanging out the side of the train.
Well, every few hours the train does stop at a station. You can get out and stretch your legs and stuff.
It's not enough. No, I need hours. I need hours away from humanity every day. It's interesting that the games themselves have a different feel. Do you think that's true because you do a lot of jams in general? Do you think that there are cultural differences to jams based on where they're held or what the limitations are?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even just with Train Jam, one of the things that I find really interesting about it is so there's 2 things I find interesting about it. There's a lot of things I find interesting about it, but I'm going to say 2 things. So one of the things is that since people are in an environment that is very different than their normal environment and very outside of their comfort zone a lot of times, because they are stuck on a metal tube, traveling the United States with a bunch of people that they don't know. And then going through these just beautifully scenic areas, because you end up going through the Rocky Mountains, the Sierra Nevada, and just all these gorgeous places in the U.S. People tend to focus on that kind of stuff and integrate it into their games. And there's a lot of games that end up coming out of it about, doing long journeys or these sceneries or, the passengers on the train or the little stories that come out of the passengers on the train. And then another interesting thing is that because it's right before GDC, what will happen is a lot of people from around the world will use it as sort of a way to get to GDC, because Chicago is a really good place to fly into from abroad anyway. So you end up getting this jam that is full of people from literally all over the world, all sharing ideas with each other, all sort of sharing their different cultural experiences and their different things, and making this amalgamation of different cultures into one game, And it's really interesting to see it because a lot of jams that you see, even, Global Game Jam or anything like that, that is a global effort. The jam sites themselves are all local, and it's still the people from your local community. It's still people maybe you've never met before, but still from your region and your area. So it's nice to see different cultures sort of interacting with each other and bringing all their different experiences and throwing those into the games for Train Jam. And you see it, reflected in a bunch of the work just from all the different things. We've had people, from Saudi Arabia and people from Australia and people from Russia all working together. And it's it's a lot of different cultures to just sort of put together, and it's neat to see.
Yeah, so is that full up for this year, or how do people sign up for it?
Oh yeah, it's super full. Actually, all the tickets sold out under a minute this year.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
that was really cool.
That was super weird. I put I knew they were gonna sell out fast, but I wasn't quite prepared for the 30 seconds. I I tweeted that the tickets were on sale, and then I went to the web page to make sure that it loaded properly, and all the tickets were gone. And I was just like, okay. Wow. So that was 160 tickets. And then what I ended up doing was, since Amtrak still has seats outside of my group reservation, I let people buy tickets directly from Amtrak outside of my group reservation and then buy into the jam itself. And so that total now is about 200 people. And that, I believe, is the entire train sold out.
Is that the biggest yet? Or like,
yeah.
Because I remember seeing Game Loading had a really beautiful sequence like set during the train jam.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the footage was just phenomenal. Like, because I must admit, like, because we've talked about this before, and I must admit, like, the image in my head was of like standard like British Rail train.
No.
Like,
Our trains
amazing.
are antiquated but beautiful.
Oh, they are gorgeous,
yeah.
And like you say, the setting is amazing. It's beautiful, and I wonder how many people saw that film and like that was exciting.
Yeah, the first year, which is the year that Game Loading was on, we had 60 people, and then last year we had 130, and then this year is 200. So we're definitely growing. And by my calculations, I think the entire capacity of the train is like 300 people. So we're nearing basically the entire train capacity. That would be phenomenal
if you could fill a train with game developers.
Oh, I think I could. I think it was just the fact that I didn't make the group reservation be the whole train is the only reason that we don't have the whole train.
Nice. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's super nice to see because, you know, when I first started Train Jam, it was born out of this idea of I had upended my life and I was leaving Boston forever. And at that point I let my apartment lease expire. I put a bunch of stuff in storage and I hopped on a train and I headed out west like a common Westerner hobo, you know, stereotype kind of person. And, you know, the train ride was beautiful and I was like, oh, this is really cool. I should get more people to do it. And then, you know, it just sort of evolved into making a game jam out of it. And so the first year I was like, this is either the worst idea I've ever had or the best idea I've ever had, and it really could have gone either way. So I'm happy it ended up being, I think, the best idea I ever had.
Nice. So what are the big? I'm trying to think of some things. So I know we have a lot of listeners who are kind of who are starting out or maybe students. Like, what are the big mistakes you've seen over and over again in the kind of game jam situation? Like, what are the things that you wish you could just kind of like grab everyone coming into a game jam and yell at them like to not do?
I think the big one, and everybody, like, this is always the one that I think everybody says, and the one that when you point it out, they go, no, I'll never do that. But it's your game idea is too big. And we touched on this earlier, but it's always too big. And I don't care how many people go, oh, no, I can totally make this procedurally generated first-person shooter VR experience in 2 days. Like, we have a VR person and a 3D modeler and a coder. Obviously, that's all you need to do it.
That's all it is, yeah.
Yeah, you just need those three people. And that is usually the biggest mistake, is people have this, they start with this grand idea, and then they slowly realize as they're working on it that it's too much, you know, and then by that point you get stuck because you've already gone so far down this idea, and so many people then don't take that moment to look back and go, okay, let's just scrap it and start over, because they think it's the time cost fallacy of,
sure,
you know, we've already spent one day on this game, even though we know it's too big and we'll never finish it, we must stick with it, you know, because if we start something else then we'll just end up in this position tomorrow. And it's just, no, what you can do is you can just stop it and have a smaller idea, have something that you will finish and be proud of. You know, it doesn't matter if you restart on day 2, it's okay.
And I think that's totally true of just prototyping in general and kind of those longer. So what's the flip side then? So with when you look back at all those games you made, 52 of them, which is ridiculous. I love it. I will never make 52 games. Like, that's beyond my capacity to produce.
For the record, most of them are not very good, and some I would classify as unplayable, but...
So that's my question, is like the ones that stand out to you, like the ones that you said that like maybe there's one or two that are like, that could actually be a thing. Like, what is it you identify? Because they've all had about a week spent on them. Is it just that those were the ones you were most excited by, or is there more to it than that? Is there stuff that you notice in those builds that you're like, this is something?
I think it's a mixture of all of it. Like, a lot of the ones that ended up being my favorite ones, there's 3 that I'm thinking of, and they're 3 very different games that came out of Game a Week. And all of them sort of had different things that were special to me. And I think, but what I think all three of them boil down to is that I had a very small idea and I enjoyed that idea and I stuck to that idea and I executed it well. So I like that sort of like magical amalgamation of having a good idea and doing it well, which
it sounds so easy when you say
I know, right? And how do you do that? I don't know. But even though the three games I'm thinking of are super different, I think all three of them boil down to that, of just having a clear vision from the start of what that idea was and doing some amount of like pre-planning before actually just jumping into it and coding and making programmer art and, you know, doing that kind of stuff. I think, yeah, the clear vision and some pre-planning. And then sticking with that idea, and then it being a good idea. Just like, because like the idea has to be good. Like,
yeah,
you can have the best execution in the world, but if it's a bad idea,
yeah, you need both, right? Like, because I've definitely seen the flip side of that, where you have like, you know, an amazing idea executed so terribly that it's like, yeah. Did you find with any of those that like your focus changed? Because I'm big on the planning side, and I like to go in like, this is what I will be doing for the next 2 weeks. But often I find myself like, you know, something's interesting or the game feels like it's leading me away from the original plan. Did you ever find that? Did you ever find that like the game you ended up with was like completely different to what you planned, but was still good? Or do you think that in that week there's not really time to course correct like that you kind of have to have a very clear vision and just go for it? I think that is one of the downfalls of just doing weekly prototyping like that, is that there isn't a lot of time to course correct. Obviously there is time to course correct, you know, usually even the good ideas, you know, would end up getting a lot of stuff trimmed out, or they would change from sort of the original idea, you know, in some ways. But that nugget, like that little beginning nugget that you start from, has always sort of remained the same for me. But I think that is like an important thing, is being able to know when to course correct to something completely different. You know, knowing when to give up an idea that you think is really cool that just isn't working, you know, and that kind of stuff. You know, does it be ready to kill your darlings or whatever? Sure. Yeah, I mean, it sounds so easy. I know, right? So easy. Yeah. But then you're like, no, this is so cool. Why doesn't it work? It has to work in this game.
So thank you for joining us, Adriel.
Thank you for having me.
Give us your social media points of contact for general public use. So I'm on the internet. My Twitter is Miss Minotaur, which is just MSMINOTAUR. And basically from there you can find everything about me. I'm Adriel. Adriel@MissMinotaur.com is my email, so that's pretty easy. And it's too late to sign up for the train jam. That's out.
It is too late to sign up unless Amtrak still has tickets, which I am not sure if they do, because I think the train is literally sold out now. But if you go to trainjam.com, and you'll see a post there about how to get the jam tickets if there are any available still through Amtrak.
Time to start planning for 2017, I guess, for anyone who's missed out. That's awesome.
I was going to say, Train Jam is always the Thursday to Saturday right before GDC. So even when I haven't announced the dates yet, it's pretty easy to figure it out if you know when the dates of GDC are. So for people who are excited for 2017, once GDC announces 2017 dates, you'll know when to start planning.
So we're going to go ahead and skip What Are You Playing This Week, because we had a really good chat with Adriel there, and dive right into what's going on at the studio. What's happening at the studio?
What's occurring? Well, lots of things, but I think the thing we're going to talk about today a little bit, because it's fair to say it's not the sexy bit of the job, right?
Yeah.
This is not the romanticized bit. This is not the bit that gets into the David Fincher adaptation of the indie game dev lifestyle. It's lawyers and all that kind of businessy shenanigans and contracts and all that stuff. It feels like there's been a lot of lawyers this week.
Lawyers and accountants.
Lawyers and accountants.
And we are going to speak about this in a positive light, because generally when this topic comes up, especially among game studios, it is not spoken in a great way, and I would like to highlight here the importance of lawyers and accountants. and what they bring to the industry. So right now we are handling several deals, and it has been a constant conversation with our attorney, who reviews the contracts and explains sort of, when there's detail points that we then need to follow up and discuss internally. It isn't, a bunch of folks get locked in a room and you make the deal and then you walk out of it, and then the lawyers are just waiting there like to scribble everything down. Papers get passed backwards and forth and everything like that. But I joked on Twitter that my life has sort of become lawyers and accountants, and every so often I talk to Mike. And that's not entirely accurate. But the sort of main reason I wanted to bring all of this up is because Mike and I both had a kind of career before we went into independent development, and we had sort of our own personal finances that allowed us to do things. And one of the difficulties that I'm finding as we're talking to a lot of independent developers who fall into the sort of romance of the coming out of school and being like, I'm going to be, forget the man. I'm gonna go out there. I'm gonna make this prototype and I'm gonna make my own game. Is the cost, and that's not just the cost of production, but the cost of all the other things you have to make sure that you do. For example, paying your taxes. Really not sexy. Definitely not sexy. But you have to pay your taxes, and then especially if you're an American like I am, and working for an international company like I am, this is the thing I just sort of had to accept. I now have my own personal accountant. Ugh. Because as an American, it doesn't matter where you live. This is a fun thing for Americans out there, or anyone with American citizenship. If you receive money anywhere on the planet, you still have to report that to the IRS. So yeah, you should do that. Because there's a fun little form that I had to that I'm going to have to fill out pretty soon. That if I don't fill it out, it's a $10,000 fine. That's not fun.
That's a lot of pressure, isn't it? I would worry about like ticking the wrong box, because I always tick the wrong box. The number of times I've had to like resubmit forms or whatever because I foolishly did something. I think the really interesting thing about this topic is that so much of game dev now is performative. Like, we're all on Twitter, we're all very vocal, we're all kind of talking and streaming and sharing what we're doing, and I think giving lots of insights into process. But the weird side effect of that is the things that we don't talk about because they're boring, or just in the background.
They're not romantic.
They're not romantic. So no one wants to hear me talk about looked at some legal forms this morning. It doesn't happen. So what's interesting about that is because it's not part of the conversation kind of between devs visibly. I think often people just either assume we don't do it, or that it's very, very light or very easy or free. I still remember when I made Thomas Was Alone. I did a crowdfund because I didn't have much money. Honestly, at that point in my life, I was living paycheck to paycheck, and I didn't have the resources to put away for Thomas Was Alone. So I did an Indiegogo for $2,000, and the $2,000 was to cover voiceover recording, which was a very small amount of that, and the rest of it was legal fees. And I remember at the time,
and let's be clear, that is a very inexpensive.
Oh, I was doing the lightest kind of legal stuff. Honestly, and my lawyer then, who is now our lawyer of the company, Jazz, was giving me a very good deal. Very, very much looking after me. So that was a very low amount. But even that, I remember pushback, and actually from other devs as well. I remember people saying, why are you spending that much on lawyers? You don't need lawyers. And it's like, no, you really do. You really, really do. And I think it's something that you see a lot of, crowdfunding and, very open books, and they don't mention lawyers or accountants. And you're like, that's accounting. Arguably, as long as you're in one country or something like that, you can kind of muddle through yourself and get it done. but
it's still scary. Like,
it's scary. And if you get something wrong, you're in a lot of trouble.
I'm learning the HMRC stuff, which is the UK version of the IRS. I'm learning all of that stuff, and yeah, it's a lot more open and easier to read than the IRS is.
Yeah. Oh, the IRS is terrifying. I remember when I had to when you sell a game on Steam, or at least you used to. I'm not sure if it's the same setup, but you used to have to get some forms from the IRS. I remember calling the IRS and literally being shouted at, which was terrifying. I was being yelled at by an American for a good half hour down the phone, and that was the point where I got an accountant, because I was like, no, this is not something I can do. I'm not up to this. But yeah, and I think that's something that we, as an industry, because we're, stuff like this podcast, we're talking to people who are starting out. This is something that I think me and you both kind of wanted to mention, that this is a part of our job, and especially a part of your job, because for those listening, like one part of Alexander's job is, a big part of Alexander's job is to remove this stuff from my plate, because it means that I can focus on the stuff that I enjoy and I'm useful at, which is making video games. But I still obviously have to be involved in a lot of these conversations.
Well, I mean, I would like to point out that it's not you being a jerk. Like, you're making it sound like you're being a jerk in this situation.
I'm always a jerk. You're
not. Like, you when we talk about things as a company, it is, we are focusing on what are we good at, what is our skill set, and your skill set is making games, and your focus is supposed to be making games. And the more you focus on the lawyers and the accountants and all that other stuff, is time that's being taken away from you making more games, which is obviously what the audience wants you to be making games. And that's
I don't get a lot of people on Twitter begging me to spend more time talking to the lawyer,
right?
And I love Jazz, and he's very nice, and he sends me a lovely box of chocolates every Christmas.
He does, actually.
He does. He's a good guy. He's my kind of people.
But the romanticized version definitely skips the lawyers and the accountants. And the other reason I want to bring this up is because we are dealing, in helping out other indie devs. We deal with a lot of younger indie devs who are just out of school, who have heard this romantic tale, and that romantic tale, we do have case examples of folks that got out of school and did it, and sort of live in a country that is supportive of it. But then a lot of the sort of folks that I know, that who are sort of the indies that made it big, they had careers beforehand. Like they were working at major studios, and so by the time they're 28, or plus, and they're transitioning into this other stuff, there is a more worldly knowledge, I guess we could put it.
They've seen lawyers in the studio having to do things, like they've seen accountants, and they know that there is this part of the industry that's not the glamour. In the same way as, I'm sure this is true of the film industry, the TV industry, like all of this stuff, like it's the stuff that's not in the making of documentary, right? Like you probably do see it in the Double Fine documentary. They must have a bit where the accountant or the lawyer is in the office.
I know the business people start showing up like 10 episodes in.
Yeah. So but it's not the interesting part, and I totally get that, but there's a truncating with the way, because we all are so public and we talk. I think people assume that if something's not visible, it's not happening in so many cases, and this is just one of those things where it's like it's an interesting part of the job, and it's something that we have to do. It costs money. I think that's the big thing that surprises people we talk to, is that it's a expensive process, right? These are very skilled people doing a very, very necessary job, and therefore can charge large amounts of money. And I think that sneaks up on people, right?
Yeah. And the same thing goes for, part of this, I would also say, like localization, right? If you are on specific platforms, you must be localized in specific languages. And that one sneaks up. We've been there now a few times with some of the folks that we're helping out. Is that one sneaks up on them really hard? They're just like, oh, I thought I thought I could put this in English. It's like, well, yeah, on that platform, but if you're going to these other platforms, you have to be translated. And it's not just that you have to be translated the game, but the storefronts that then exist in all of these other countries. You have to be you have to translate your store copy, your store language into all of those different regions as well. So this requires money. So I know that a lot of folks talk about when you go to GDC or PAX or I've absolutely seen presentations on make sure that you've got 15% set aside for your marketing spend, or whatever the marketing cost is. Lawyers and accountants, they're real. And
can we give some rough numbers for people, do you think? I mean, it's a very hard thing to quantify, but just so they have a sense of what we're talking about in terms of very vague, and obviously it will vary from lawyer to lawyer, it'll vary from project to project, but what kind of ballpark are we talking here for people?
I mean, what do you want, like, where do you want to go with this?
Well, let's say I'm going to create a mythical version of events. Let's say, so I'm an indie.
Okay.
I'm making a PC game.
Sure.
Predominantly. I'm hoping to get on Steam. Maybe I'm in Greenlight already, or I've got through Greenlight, and my game's awesome. It's going to get on Steam, right?
Cool.
That's cool. It's lovely imagining these situations. It makes it much easier to make good games. Where you can just say they're good. And I'm thinking about console. That's usually the next step for a lot of these people, is they've made a really cool PC game and they're thinking about console. So
now, are you thinking about console, or are you already talking to the console folks?
Let's say I've started flirting, and I'm starting to think, like, can I afford this?
Okay.
Can I afford? And we'll keep it general. Can I afford to launch my game on the Megabox 4?
Okay. So in terms of, so have you already put your game out on Steam? Like, and
the game is done, but it's entirely in English.
Okay.
I've made it myself using an existing engine. Let's pretend that the engine doesn't cost anything, because it's such a good game that I made it in Unity, and they're gonna give me the license.
They blessed you with a free license.
They blessed me with a free license. It's a great game. Let's just talk, just because I think this is the thing. I think developers are very good at working out, like, what's the engine going to cost, how long is it going to take me to port it, these kind of things. But this stuff we're talking about now, this more ethereal kind of accounting, localization, lawyers, like, where does that number, what amount of money am I going to need to take from my Steam sales?
Cool.
In order to cover this?
Now, I'm going to caveat this by saying your lawyer rates may differ. Mm-hmm. This is just general what we might experience, and so that's my caveat on this. All right, you're out on Steam. Lawyer-wise, I'm not that concerned about your lawyer. I am concerned about your accountant, because what you're going to have to do is you are going to want to create a corporation so that you are protecting yourself. Oh, wait, there's your lawyer. Never mind. I found him.
There he is.
I found your lawyer. Yeah. So you're going to want to make a corporation. That alone is a few thousand. There are websites that I believe you can go through now, but I'm absolutely not going to promote those here.
But Alexander, someone told me on the internet that it only costs £35 in the UK to incorporate a corporation. What do you mean thousands? You're obviously blowing this out of proportion.
That's the websites again. And you can go through that, and it can set you up in a certain way, but you're going to want to talk to that person, because if you live in the States, for example, there are specific states that you want to incorporate in, because different states have different tax rules and different protections for your company. So you're gonna wanna be in a specific state, and your attorney will be the one that puts that in motion, so that you incorporate in a specific state and get it covered. And believe me, almost every corporation that you know is incorporated in one specific state, because it provides the most protections. Okay. In the UK, I can't really speak to that because I've never created a corporation in the UK, but I would still say there's a lawyer involved in creating that portion of it.
Especially, I assume, if I'm making this game with a friend, say, or I have some.
Oh, you have to make a partnership. Yep, you have to make a partnership agreement.
Kind of stuff as well.
Yep. You have to make a partnership agreement. You have to come up with the terms of what happens if the company dissolves. What happens? Who is controlling that game on Steam going forward? You are entering into a marriage at that point, and that's. I'm not even going. That's not even being dramatic.
And also, like, just to be a bit more morbid, a will. You're going to both need wills because what happens to your shares in this when if you hopefully you don't hopefully you're immortal, but if you're not,
sadly that actually happened to a friend of mine.
Really?
Yeah, he created a game and started he had it out there, and then he sadly passed away. And there was a legal vacuum in what happened next, and so that had to be dealt with. Okay, so that's the lawyer in creating your company, but then you also have to get a corporate tax return done, which is going to be several thousand, and that's unavoidable because you're not filling out your own corporate tax return. that's not going to happen. You could find an accountant that does that at a relatively low cost. But it typically is a couple to a few thousand to get that done. That is just PC. Platforms for your Megabox 4. For your Megabox 4, you will be required to have localization. Localization, depending on how many words you have, but let's say lowest figure, we're talking 5K. But if you are anywhere in, a sort of normal sized title, because it's not just.
Are we talking, just to be clear, by the way, because I'm British and you're American, we're talking in dollars right now? Or pounds?
It's really so variable. We could go.
Fair enough.
We could go either way on this one.
It could be. Yeah, it's between £5,000 and $5,000.
Yeah, like lowest, right?
Lowest,
because the other thing no one really thinks about is they think you're just translating the story, right? The text on the screen. No. You're translating the interface stuff. You're translating. What are all the
metadata is the thing.
Metadata.
Right? Metadata is the big one because we were surprised by this, like on some of the stuff where we obviously localized the game into a certain number of languages, but then the platforms often require more languages beyond that, and it's not the whole game, but it's the title of the game, a description of the game, a shortened description of the game, some tags sometimes, instructions, all manner of different things. And those require, that could be required in, I don't know, how many languages is our metadata for volume localized to at this point?
The store data?
The store metadata?
22?
22 languages.
Yeah.
Now, obviously that's not as necessarily terrifying as it sounds because a good localization company will be able to do all of that for you in one place. So it's not massive, but there is a big cost associated with doing this, with doing your in-game stuff. We didn't localize our voiceover. Obviously, that's a massive cost if you want to even go down that road.
And that is massive cost.
Yeah.
Like that is a massive cost difference. Once you start talking about seriously, I should send a box of chocolates to whoever does that stuff over at Naughty Dog for Uncharted because they localize in so many, voice localize in so many languages, and just the scale of that to me is just mind-boggling. Forget making the game, forget making Uncharted. We are talking about localizing in all those languages, voice, and having it acted through properly and not sound terrible. Bless that team. Good on them. They earn their box of chocolates. So that's localization. You also have to negotiate your contract with the platform holder. That definitely requires a lawyer to review those different elements. And then, because you are now receiving money from Steam and you are receiving money from the different regions of the platform holders, you have to keep track of all of that. and then supply that to your accountant, and potentially pay whatever taxes need to be paid on that, and fill out whatever forms need to be paid on that, because depending on what country you're in, there's going to be different forms you need to fill out, because you are transferring this money from typically the United States. Because if you're on Steam, that's the US, or even Humble, right? That's still the US. You are transferring money, and there are forms you need to fill out there. So to answer the console version of this, yes, you are going to need an accountant for all that money. You're going to need a lawyer to negotiate the deal for you, or at least review the deal for you, because you shouldn't be signing anything without reviewing it. And that's not even getting into if you go into a PlayStation Plus or an Xbox Gold or any of that other stuff. Like, we're not even going to talk about that. But that is the reason why a lawyer and an accountant and a good localization team apparently is the great hidden costs that nobody talks about.
Nobody does. Now the massive elephant in the room. So obviously everyone listening now has decided to stop work on their game, to give up, to get a job, working for someone else, and to just kind of forget their dream. But there are options, right? So there's lots of options. One is, if you have previous games or whatever. So our solution to all these problems was we had a successful game previously, Thomas Was Alone, and we funneled some of that money into this. Yep. That's one way of doing it. Have rich parents. I've seen that work for people. If you're in
marry
the audience, marry rich, marry rich. The other options that kind of stick out to me are kind of either the crowdfunding route, which is difficult because this isn't the sexy stuff. You're going to be going to those kind of platforms and saying, hey, I really need to sort out my accounting, is a tough sell to a kind of a gamer audience, because they're much more interested and knowledgeable, I guess, on adding new animations, adding new enemies, making cool new levels. Like, that stuff, while very, very important, is not the stuff you're likely to need. The other thing, the massive elephant in the room is, as an indie developer, you very quickly realize why publishers exist, because everything we've just described can be solved by a publisher. If you haven't got the cash, in exchange often for like a percentage of some kind or something like that, these costs can be massively diminished. You're still going to need a lawyer to help you negotiate with the publisher,
and you really need the lawyer for that. Forget like that, the other stuff we were just talking about, you doing it solo. If you're negotiating with a publisher, you must have a lawyer for your side of things, because now we are starting to talk about, how do you get compensated? What is the structure of your compensation? How much do they get paid? When do they get paid? Sometimes there's an upfront payment that they provide you that they recoup over a certain period of time. Like, that is something a lawyer needs to walk you through.
Yeah. And how that works, and stuff that, like, again, similar to the kind of get a will conversation, like, what happens if that company closes its stores? What happens if your company changes, or what happens if blah 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 blah? Like, lots of potential future possibilities that maybe don't occur to you now, but like in the fullness of time you're going to wonder about. The good news there, though, is that as I alluded to earlier, a lot of lawyers who specialize in games are willing to do the work on the cheap for you at the start of your career. If you're an indie starting out, you're trying to get that first game kind of out, and it's got some buzz or some interest, lawyers will literally be lining up to kind of help you out. That's the plus side. Certainly they're playing a long game. Like, they're obviously lovely people, but more importantly, they're also smart people. And they know that if they help you now with this one contract, when you're a few years along and you're getting through the insane number of contracts that we seem to be getting through at this point, there's a lot more work for them in the future, which they can charge full price for. Mm-hmm. So I guess my thing is, I think I like this because this feels like it's a nice cold splash of water. But at the same time, I don't want to put anyone off. I want people to go in a bit more informed, but there are definitely routes to do this. And I cannot express enough I didn't have any money when I made Thomas Was Alone. I had a wage and it was spent by the end of the month. And, it is doable. It is possible. And it's absolutely, you can work out ways to make these things work. But I wish I'd been aware of all the stuff that was coming down the river.
All right, and now it's time for reader mail. This one's from Pip Turner. He says, "Hey guys, love the podcast. Great to hear a studio talking about the ins and outs of how it works." And boy, did we ever just do that. Any practical tips you'd give to developers who are just starting out, i.e. stay away from big companies or work on something you love, even if you don't think it'll be profitable, etc., etc. I'm going to let Mike answer this one, and I'm just going to say, hopefully you've listened to what we just talked about in the previous segment, because we covered a lot of the things that I think are incredibly important starting out and making sure that you're secured going into the future.
Yeah, I think that stuff was hopefully useful. I think also a lot of the stuff that Adriel talked about in the interview I thought was really useful. I love her focus on herself and her own goals rather than the thing. I'm way too focused on the games, and I'm not necessarily as focused on my objectives long term. I think that's the best advice I think I could give is try, even though it's hard, to not think about like which is the job or what's the game or whatever, but to think about yourself and where you want to go and what you want things to be like for you in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years, and what you want to be good at and what you want to be, what do you not care about, what doesn't interest you. And find a path through your career and the things you make that gets you there. And it's very specific to you. It's not, I think emulating people is always a bad idea, because often people, well, A, they're different people. B, they probably didn't plan to get exactly what they're doing right now. It's probably a bit of an accident. So yeah, that's the best advice I can give is focus on what you want on a personal level and then build the career around that.
And Pip's second question is also, what are your thoughts on the price of VR now that Oculus is now available to pre-order and the Vive what is it?
I've been told off for both uses, so let's call it the Vive for the purposes of these.
Okay,
and
so the Vive.
We will no doubt get comments. The Vive, yeah, let's call it the Vive. Shall
be available soon. Do you think that the price will slow the massive growth and consumer interest in it? Thanks for such a great podcast, Pip. So the sort of context we should give here is that Oculus announced very recently that the price of its VR headset will be $600 when it launches, and we currently do not know the price of the PlayStation VR headset, which is sort of the next bit of that, and we also don't even have a clue what the Vive is even going to be like, because I think the Vive is still much further out than the rest of it. So a conversation about price is pretty much not where we should be going with this conversation. But does price massive growth? Like you're talking to someone who was there when HD TVs got introduced and they were $15,000. So I don't know how to talk about that, but do I think this has slowed interest in VR? I think it's given a competitor an opportunity to really get VR into the hands of customers. So, Mike,
I think this may be, and this is a big bold statement, I think this may be a real case for the kind of the echo chamber of tech nerdy people, specifically game people. We've kind of lost track, I think, of what VR is, like in terms of, or where it is in its life cycle. It feels like everyone's been talking about VR for a couple of years. They have, obviously Oculus kind of came out the gate and then everyone kind of caught up. And there's been a lot of VR talk and VR headsets. And you go to any trade event, there's VR headsets. I look around my living room, I've got a bunch of them from various different things. And I think people think VR's already out and that it's already a consumer device, and it's not. If you I occasionally, like, if I my mum, for example, I had over Christmas and I put the PlayStation VR on her head, and she was playing a game on that, and she'd heard of VR, but for her VR was something that happened in the 80s. It wasn't, there's a whole audience there, and the whole world at large does not care about VR at all yet, because it's not out yet. What I think's happened here is I think people see that $600 price and they see it as the cost of a release of another product in this long chain of VR products. Whereas actually it's the first price. It's the starter price. It's a price targeted at a very specific hardcore demographic who care about the game. The reality is the mainstream don't care yet. You can see them starting to gain interest with the Samsung Gear, which is much cheaper, unsurprisingly. I also think, you're going to see the PlayStation VR come out. I think that's going to be very targeted at a hardcore gamer, which is one step down from the super early adopter. So I think the price will probably reflect that difference.
And we know the tech that it runs on, which is a very important part of this conversation, is that when you purchase PlayStation VR, it's the PlayStation 4. It's
a standardized computer. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's something that, again, makes the Oculus. I mean, I've played with the most recent Oculus. It's brilliant. It's a fantastic piece of kit. Same with the Vive. But they are basically as good as the computer they're plugged into, which does make this, very complicated. I think the average person doesn't necessarily think that you can play games on a PC. It's a very big leap, and I think a lot of people have jumped to making big assumptions about this slowing down VR's adoption. I'd make the argument that VR's adoption hasn't yet to begin, and we're all talking about it. We all know about it, but this is not a race that started yet. So I think this is the first. The fact that there's good competition right out the gate is brilliant, because what that means, imagine a world where the iPhone had launched in the same space of 6 months as a absolutely solid competitor from Android. If iPhone had launched and there was a Nokia handset with the same capabilities-ish, and a Samsung with the same capabilities-ish, and a Sony Ericsson, and all these things, it'd be a very different ecosystem right now in the phone world. And I think that's what we're going to see with VR, is because of the crowd-funded element of this, because everyone's had a long lead time, we're launching, I think it's one of the first times in tech where lots of different manufacturers are making stuff in the same class, and they're all going to be competing, and one of the areas they'll be competing in is price. And I think we'll see, I think $600 is not a price that's going to stand as the price of VR for too long.
All right. And so if you have any reader mail for us or questions you want to ask, send us that at contact@bithellgames.com. That's contact, CONTACT, at Bithell Games, BITHELL games.com, and we will talk about it on this show thing. So thanks for listening to this episode of the Bithell Games Podcast. You can always support us, so please provide us reviews on the iTunes. Those 5 stars look lovely, I know, thank you. Likes and subscribes on YouTube, positive reinforcement on whatever platform of choice you're hearing us on or interacting with us. This podcast was produced by Jonathan Downen. We will be back next week. I am Alexander Slinsky. Thanks again. Get in the last word, Mike.
Cryptogram.